You think a nobody like you belongs on this stage? Celeste Moreau's voice, sharp as shattered glass, pierced the opulent air of the Paris fashion show, her scorn raining down on Nia Carter, the black designer whose poised elegance defied the venom. As Celeste viciously yanked Nia's glossy black hair, the crowd's gasp mingled with the flash of phones, immortalizing the cruelty. Yet beneath Nia's serene facade, a storm brewed, a force of unyielding dignity and hidden power that would unravel an empire. This is no mere tale of malice, it's a saga of resilience that shattered arrogance in its own glittering arena. Share where and when you're tuning in from below, and subscribe to join us on this journey. Nia's hidden strength and the shocking twist that left her tormentor begging will keep you riveted until the final moment. Nia's quiet strength and the seismic reckoning that left her tormentor pleading will grip your soul until the final curtain falls. The Paris night pulsed with anticipation, its skyline a constellation of lights that bowed to the grandeur of the Palais des Modes, where the world's fashion elite converged for the season's most anticipated show. Inside, chandeliers dripped with crystal, casting prismatic rainbows across a sea of velvet seats filled with critics, celebrities, and tycoons. The air thrummed with the hum of whispered expectations, the clink of champagne flutes, and the soft rustle of silk gowns. At the heart of it all stood Nia Carter, a black designer whose name was whispered in reverent tones by those who knew her work, and in ignorance by those who didn't. Her latest collection, a symphony of bold textures and daring cuts, had just set the runway ablaze, each model a living canvas of her genius. Nia, with her lustrous black hair cascading like a midnight river and her face a portrait of serene elegance, stepped forward to take her bow. "You think a nobody like you belongs on this stage?" The voice cut through the applause like a blade, sharp and venomous, silencing the room in an instant. Celeste Moreau, the self-crowned catwalk queen, strutted forward, her silver gown glinting like a predator's scales under the spotlight. Daughter of a fashion empire titan, Celeste's presence was a storm of privilege. Her platinum blonde hair swept high, her lips curled in a sneer that promised cruelty. The crowd froze, their collective breath held as her words landed like a slap. "This runway is for legends, not charity cases who stitch rags in the dark." Her voice dripped with disdain, each syllable a calculated barb aimed at Nia's heritage, her skin, her very existence. Nia stood motionless, her emerald gown shimmering like liquid jade, its elegance a stark contrast to the venom hurled her way. Her long, glossy hair, a cascade of black silk, framed her face, where not a flicker of weakness dared to show. But Celeste wasn't done. With a predator's grace, she closed the distance, her heels clicking like gunshots on the polished runway. Without warning, her manicured hands shot out, seizing a fistful of Nia's hair and yanking it with savage force. A sharp cry escaped Nia's lips, a raw, involuntary sound that echoed through the stunned silence. The crowd gasped, a collective jolt of shock rippling through the room. Phones flashed to life, capturing the moment as strands of Nia's hair tore free, glinting like dark threads under the blinding lights. The Palais des Modes, a temple of beauty, became a coliseum of cruelty. Laughter, cruel, jagged, and eager, erupted from pockets of the audience, led by Celeste's coterie of sycophants, their diamond-encrusted wrists clapping in delight. A fashion critic in a velvet tuxedo smirked, whispering loudly, "She's got nerve showing up here." A socialite in a feathered gown raised her phone higher, her lips curling as she angled for the perfect shot. Yet amid the sea of malice, a few faces stood out. Those who knew Nia beyond the runway. A journalist who'd once covered her charity workshops at orphanages for black children widened her eyes in disbelief. A philanthropist who'd seen Nia distribute hand-stitched clothes to kids in need shifted uncomfortably, his jaw tight. They knew the truth. Nia Carter was no outsider. She was a quiet force, a woman who spent her days in modest apartments, sketching designs, and her nights teaching disadvantaged youth to dream through needle and thread. Nia's cry of pain lingered in the air, but her composure returned like a tide reclaiming the shore. Her hands, elegant and steady, rose to smooth her disheveled hair, each movement deliberate, a silent refusal to be diminished. Her face, a canvas of calm dignity, betrayed no tears, no rage, only a quiet fire in her dark eyes that burned brighter with every jeer. Celeste leaned closer, her perfume a cloying cloud of roses and smoke, and hissed, "Look at you, pretending you're one of us. You're nothing but a stain on this stage." The crowd's laughter swelled again, a wave of derision crashing against the crystal chandeliers. A young influencer in the front row giggled, her phone trained on Nia's face, eager to turn humiliation into viral gold. But Nia's life was not this runway, nor this venomous crowd. In her private world, far from the glitz, she was a woman of quiet rituals. Her mornings began with chamomile tea in a cozy Brooklyn apartment, where sunlight spilled over sketchbooks filled with her visions. Her weekends were spent in community centers, teaching Black orphans to sew, their laughter a melody that fueled her soul. She donated every spare dollar to scholarships, her name rarely attached to the checks. Nia Carter was a paradox, a designer whose creations dazzled the world, yet whose heart belonged to those society overlooked. Few in this room knew of the nights she spent mending secondhand clothes for foster kids, or the way her soft voice inspired them to believe in their worth. Fewer still knew of her shadow empire, the financial web she'd woven through years of silent investments, a power so vast it could topple dynasties. Celeste, oblivious to the storm she'd awakened, tossed her hair and spun to face her audience, her silver gown catching the light like a beacon of arrogance. "She doesn't belong here," she declared, her voice a command that demanded agreement. The crowd obliged, their laughter a chorus of complicity, though the journalist and philanthropist exchanged uneasy glances. They knew Nia's truth, her quiet philanthropy, her unshakable resolve. They saw the lie in Celeste's cruelty, but their silence was a choice, a nod to the status quo. Nia's chest rose and fell, her breath steady despite the sting in her scalp. Her eyes, deep and unyielding, locked onto Celeste's, a silent vow that this moment would not define her. The runway, once a stage for art, had become a battlefield, and Nia Carter stood at its center, unbroken. Her hair, though tugged and torn, still gleamed like a crown of obsidian. Her gown, a masterpiece of her own creation, hugged her frame like armor. The crowd's jeers, the flashing phones, the cruel laughter, they were but noise against the steel of her spirit. Celeste thought she'd claimed victory, her smirk as sharp as the diamonds around her neck. But Nia's silence was no surrender. It was a gathering storm, a force of dignity so profound it began to shift the air in the room. The journalist leaned forward, her pen poised. The philanthropist's frown deepened. They sensed what Celeste could not. This was no ending, but a beginning. And Nia Carter, with her quiet grace and hidden power, was about to rewrite the script. The backstage of the Palais des Modes buzzed with a frenetic energy, a labyrinth of mirrored vanities, racks of couture gowns, and the sharp clatter of stilettos on polished marble. The air was thick with the scent of hairspray and ambition, a heady mix that barely masked the venom lingering from the runway's public spectacle. Nia Carter stood near a velvet curtain, her emerald gown still radiant despite the ordeal, its satin folds catching the dim glow of overhead lights. Her long, glossy black hair, though slightly disheveled from Celeste Moreau's brutal tug, was now smoothed back, each strand a testament to her unshakable composure. Her face, a portrait of serene elegance, held no trace of the pain that had ripped through her scalp moments ago. But her eyes, dark, deep, and burning with a quiet fire, told a different story, one of resilience forged in countless unseen battles. Celeste, the catwalk queen, swept into the backstage area like a storm, her silver gown shimmering with predatory gleam, her platinum blonde hair a halo of arrogance. The crowd of designers, models, and VIPs parted instinctively, their eyes darting between her and Nia. Celeste's lips curled into a sneer, her voice slicing through the chatter. "Look at her, still standing here like she belongs," she mocked, loud enough for every ear to catch. "A seamstress from the slums, playing dress-up in Paris." The words were laced with racial venom, each syllable a deliberate jab at Nia's black heritage. Her presence an affront to Celeste's gilded world. A ripple of laughter followed, led by a cluster of influencers draped in borrowed couture, their phones already poised to capture the next viral moment. Nia's breath caught, but her posture remained unyielding, her hands steady at her sides. She was no stranger to this kind of cruelty, the kind that cloaked itself in privilege and called it wit. She thought of the children she taught to sew at the Brooklyn orphanage, their small hands threading needles under her patient guidance, their laughter a balm against the world's harsh edges. She thought of her quiet evenings, sketching designs by lamplight, her dreams stitched into every seam. This world of glitz was not her home, but she had earned her place in it, and no one, not even Celeste Moreau, could erase that truth. Celeste, sensing the crowd's hunger for more, stepped closer, her heels clicking like a countdown to chaos. "Let's make this clear," she said, her voice a venomous purr. She reached for a glass of red wine from a passing waiter's tray, and with a theatrical flourish, tipped it onto Nia's one-of-a-kind gown. The crimson liquid splashed across the emerald satin, a violent stain spreading like blood across jade. "There," Celeste sneered, her eyes glinting with malice. "Now it matches your kind. Cheap and out of place." The crowd erupted, a chorus of gasps and cruel chuckles echoing off the mirrored walls. A model in a sequined dress clapped, her diamond bracelets jangling, while a fashion editor smirked, scribbling notes as if this were part of the show. Nia's heart thudded, the sting of the wine seeping through her gown, but her face remained a mask of calm. She reached for a napkin from a nearby table, her movements deliberate, almost ceremonial, as she dabbed at the stain. Her long hair, now neatly tucked behind her shoulders, shimmered under the lights, a crown of defiance. The crowd watched, some with glee, others with unease. A stylist who'd once attended Nia's charity workshop at a Harlem community center shifted uncomfortably, her eyes darting away. She knew Nia, the woman who spent weekends mending clothes for foster kids, who funded scholarships with no fanfare. Another guest, a philanthropist who'd seen Nia distribute hand-stitched jackets to orphans, whispered to his companion, "This is wrong. She's not what Celeste thinks." But Celeste thrived on the crowd's complicity. She circled Nia like a vulture, her voice rising to ensure every ear caught her venom. "You think you can waltz in here with your little designs and sit at our table?" She taunted, her words dripping with racial contempt. "You're nothing but a novelty, a diversity checkbox for the press." She paused, letting the crowd's laughter swell, then leaned in close, her breath hot with wine and malice. "Go back to your sewing machine in whatever hole you crawled out of." The room roared again, phones flashing like vultures' eyes, capturing Nia's humiliation for the world to consume. Nia's nails pressed into her palms, a sharp anchor against the tide of rage threatening to rise. She thought of the kids at the orphanage, their faces lighting up when she taught them to hem their first shirt. She thought of the nights she'd spent building her brand, stitch by stitch, dollar by dollar, until it rivaled empires like the Moreaus. Her silence was not weakness. It was a choice, a shield forged in years of navigating rooms that tried to make her small. She lifted her chin, her eyes locking onto Celeste's with a quiet intensity that made the air feel heavier. The laughter faltered for a moment, a crack in the crowd's unity. The stylist looked down, ashamed. The philanthropist's whisper grew louder. "She's more than they know." Celeste sensed the shift, and it infuriated her. She stepped closer, her hand hovering near Nia's hair, as if to repeat the runway's brutality, but she stopped short, opting instead for a mocking pat on Nia's shoulder. "Look at her, so quiet," she said, turning to the crowd. "She knows her place, doesn't she?" The laughter returned, but it was thinner now, less certain. A few guests lowered their phones, their smirks fading. Nia's gown, though stained, still clung to her like armor, its elegance a silent rebuke to Celeste's cruelty. Her hair, a cascade of black silk, caught the light, a reminder of her unbroken spirit. In her private world, Nia was a beacon of kindness, a woman who found joy in teaching children to dream through fabric and thread. She lived for the quiet moments, reading poetry in her modest apartment, sketching designs that told stories of resilience, donating her earnings to those who needed them most. But she was also a titan in the shadows, her investments a web of power that stretched across the fashion industry, unseen by those blinded by their own arrogance. Celeste's words, her actions, were but sparks against the steel of Nia's resolve. The crowd might laugh, might record, might revel in this moment of cruelty, but Nia stood tall, her silence a gathering storm. She smoothed her gown once more, her fingers steady, her eyes never leaving Celeste's. The catwalk queen thought she'd won, but she had no idea what kind of force she'd provoked. The grand ballroom of the Hotel Deluxe shimmered under a constellation of chandeliers, their golden light fracturing across mirrored walls and marble floors. The post-show gala was a spectacle of excess, where fashion moguls, celebrities, and critics mingled, their laughter and clinking glasses a symphony of privilege. The air carried the scent of rare perfumes and aged champagne, but beneath the opulence a darker current pulsed, a lingering malice from the runway's brutal scene. Nia Carter stood near a towering floral arrangement, her emerald gown still bearing the faint stain of Celeste Moreau's wine, a scarlet scar on its satin surface. Her long, glossy black hair, meticulously smoothed after the earlier assault, cascaded like a dark river, framing her face, which remained a mask of serene elegance. Her eyes, deep and unyielding, held a quiet fire that seemed to absorb the room's light rather than reflect it. Celeste, the catwalk queen, swept through the crowd, her silver gown glinting like a blade, her platinum blonde hair a crown of arrogance. She moved with the confidence of someone who believed the world bent to her whims, her laughter sharp and commanding as she held court among a cluster of admirers. But her eyes kept darting to Nia, a predator sensing unfinished business. "Look at her, still lingering like a stain that won't wash out," Celeste announced, her voice cutting through the hum of conversation. The words were laced with racial venom, a deliberate echo of her runway taunts, designed to keep Nia in her place. "She thinks she can stand among us, but she's just a prop for the diversity photos." The crowd tittered, a nervous ripple of laughter from those eager to align with power. Phones flashed, capturing the moment for social media's insatiable appetite. Nia stood motionless, her posture a pillar of defiance wrapped in grace. Her hands rested lightly at her sides, fingers steady despite the storm of humiliation raging around her. She thought of the children at the Brooklyn orphanage, their eager faces as she taught them to stitch their dreams into fabric. She thought of her quiet evenings, sketching in her modest apartment, where the world's noise faded and her vision took shape. This glittering gala, with its gilded cruelty, was not her world, but she had carved her place in it through talent and tenacity. Celeste's words were sharp, but they were nothing compared to the battles Nia had already won. Battles fought in boardrooms that dismissed her, in studios where her skin marked her as an outsider. Celeste, emboldened by the crowd's response, glided closer, her heels clicking like a metronome of malice. She stopped inches from Nia, her perfume a suffocating cloud of roses and ash. "What's the matter?" she hissed, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "Too ashamed to speak? Or do you know you don't belong here?" With a theatrical flourish, she reached out, her fingers brushing Nia's hair as if to adjust it, but the gesture was a cruel mockery, a reminder of the runway's violence. The crowd gasped, some leaning forward, others shifting uncomfortably. A fashion editor who'd once praised Nia's charity work at a Harlem shelter averted her eyes, her pen stilled. A philanthropist who'd seen Nia fund scholarships for black orphans whispered to his companion, "She doesn't deserve this. She's extraordinary." The room's laughter was less unified now, fractured by whispers of doubt. Nia's silence was no longer just a response. It was a force, a weight that pressed against the crowd's conscience. Her hair, a cascade of black silk, caught the chandelier's light, a crown of resilience that refused to bow. Her face, serene and elegant, was a mirror reflecting the ugliness of their complicity. Celeste sensed the shift, and it infuriated her. She spun to face the crowd, her voice rising. "Look at her, standing there like she's above us," she mocked. "She thinks silence makes her special, but it just proves she's nothing." The words were meant to rally her audience, but the laughter that followed was thinner, hesitant. A model in a sequined gown lowered her phone, her smirk fading. A critic in a velvet blazer frowned, his earlier amusement replaced by unease. Nia's heart pounded, a steady drum against the chaos, but her breath remained slow, deliberate. She remembered the kids at the orphanage, their small hands clutching her designs, their eyes bright with hope. She remembered the nights she'd spent building her brand, stitch by stitch, until it rivaled empires like the Moreau's. Her silence was a choice, a shield forged in years of navigating spaces that tried to erase her. She lifted her chin, her eyes locking onto Celeste's with an intensity that made the air feel electric. The crowd's laughter faltered further, a crack in their unity. The philanthropist's whisper grew louder. She's not just a designer. She's a force. The editor nodded, her guilt palpable. Celeste's smirk wavered, a hairline fracture in her confidence. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "You're fooling no one," she spat. "You'll always be the girl from the wrong side of town, no matter how much silk you drape yourself in." But her words lacked their earlier bite, sounding desperate, almost pleading. The crowd's eyes shifted, no longer fixed on Celeste but on Nia, whose silence had become a presence, a storm gathering in the quiet. A waiter holding a tray of champagne hesitated, his gaze flickering with respect. A designer who'd once collaborated with Nia at a charity event shook her head, muttering, "Celeste doesn't know who she's dealing with." Nia's gown, though marred by wine, clung to her like armor, its emerald glow a beacon of defiance. Her hair, smooth with care, shimmered like a dark crown, a symbol of her unbroken spirit. The room, once a stage for Celeste's cruelty, was shifting under the weight of Nia's silence. It was not submission, it was power, a quiet rebellion that forced the crowd to confront their own complicity. Celeste, sensing her grip slipping, tossed her hair and forced a laugh, but it rang hollow, echoing off the chandeliers with no response. The philanthropist stepped forward, his voice low but firm. "Enough," he said, his eyes on Nia. The crowd stilled, their phones lowering, their laughter dying. Nia stood tall, her silence louder than any words, a promise that this battle was far from over, and the true reckoning had yet to begin. The private salon of the Hôtel de Luxe was a fortress of power, its walls lined with gilded panels that reflected the soft glow of crystal sconces. A long mahogany table dominated the room, surrounded by a select group of fashion industry titans, investors, CEOs, and trendsetters whose decisions shaped empires. The air was heavy with the scent of polished wood and cigar smoke, the low hum of murmured negotiations punctuated by the clink of crystal tumblers. Nia Carter sat at one end of the table, her emerald gown still bearing the faint stain of Celeste Moreau's wine, a silent testament to the cruelty she'd endured. Her long, glossy black hair cascaded over her shoulders, each strand catching the light like a polished obsidian blade. Her face, a portrait of serene elegance, betrayed no trace of the storm that had raged against her, but her eyes, dark, steady, and piercing, held a quiet intensity that seemed to shift the very gravity of the room. Celeste Moreau, the Catwalk queen, lounged at the opposite end, her silver gown shimmering like liquid mercury, her platinum blonde hair swept into an imperious updo. She leaned back in her chair, one manicured hand swirling a glass of champagne, her lips curled in a smirk that oozed confidence. This was her domain, a battlefield where her family's name, the Moreau dynasty, reigned supreme. The meeting was meant to discuss investment opportunities, including Nia's proposal to expand her burgeoning brand. But Celeste had other plans. "Let's be honest," she said, her voice slicing through the room's murmurs like a shard of glass. "Nia's little designs might charm the charity crowd, but they're hardly worth the capital of this table." Her words dripped with racial condescension, a deliberate echo of her runway taunts. "She's out of her depth here, playing at business with the big players." The room stirred, a ripple of uneasy chuckles from investors eager to align with the Moreau name. A hedge fund manager in a tailored suit smirked, his pen tapping the table. A fashion conglomerate executive raised an eyebrow, her diamond earrings glinting as she leaned forward. But Nia remained still, her hands folded calmly in her lap, her gown glowing under the sconces like a beacon of defiance. She thought of the children at the Brooklyn orphanage, their faces lighting up as she taught them to stitch their dreams into fabric. She thought of her quiet nights sketching in her modest apartment, building a brand that rivaled the giants through sheer will. This room, with its polished power, was just another stage, and Celeste's cruelty was just another script she'd rewrite. Celeste leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "You think you can sit here, pretending you're one of us?" she taunted, her voice loud enough to carry to every corner. "You're a seamstress in borrowed silk, nothing more." The laughter grew, a cruel chorus fed by her arrogance. A few investors nodded, their faces smug, but others hesitated. A venture capitalist who'd once attended Nia's charity gala for black orphans shifted in his seat, his brow furrowing. He knew her, not just as a designer, but as a silent force who funded futures with no fanfare. A fashion critic who'd praised Nia's work whispered to her neighbor, "She's more than they think." Their voices were soft, but they carried a seed of doubt that began to fracture the room's unity. Nia's heart beat steadily, a drum against the rising tide of malice. She reached into her sleek clutch, pulling out a simple black phone that gleamed under the light. The room's chatter faltered, eyes drawn to the deliberate motion. Celeste scoffed, her laugh sharp and brittle. "What's this? Calling for a cab to take you back to where you belong?" The crowd snickered, phones already rising to capture what they assumed would be Nia's retreat. But Nia's face remained serene, her lips parting only to take a slow, deliberate breath. She pressed a single button, lifting the phone to her ear with the grace of a conductor raising a baton. The room fell silent, the air taut with anticipation, as if the chandeliers themselves held their breath. "Yes," Nia said into the phone, her voice low but resonant, each word a polished stone. "Withdraw the full $5 billion from the Moreau Fund. Effective immediately." The words landed like a thunderclap, shattering the room's fragile equilibrium. Gasps erupted, sharp and jagged, as investors froze, their eyes wide with disbelief. Celeste's champagne glass trembled in her hand, her smirk collapsing into a mask of shock. "You're bluffing," she stammered, her voice cracking. "No one moves that kind of money with a phone call." But the venture capitalist's face paled, his phone buzzing with an urgent alert. The critic's whisper grew urgent. "She's the one behind the Carter Trust. She can do this." The room's laughter died, replaced by a tense hum of disbelief. Nia slipped the phone back into her clutch, her movements as calm as a still lake, her hair shimmering like a dark crown. She didn't need to speak again. Her silence was now a weapon, sharper than any of Celeste's barbs. The hedge fund manager fumbled with his phone, his fingers shaking as he checked the markets. The executive's earrings stopped glinting as she leaned back, her face ashen. They knew the truth. Nia wasn't just a designer. She was a titan, her investments a shadow empire that held the strings of the fashion world. Celeste's eyes darted wildly, her composure unraveling. "This is absurd," she shouted, slamming her glass on the table, champagne splashing like her fading authority. "My father's empire is untouchable." But the room wasn't hers anymore. Eyes shifted to Nia, whose serene presence seemed to expand, filling the space with a quiet power that dwarfed Celeste's theatrics. The venture capitalist muttered, "$5 billion. She just pulled the rug out from under them." The critic nodded, her pen scribbling furiously. Nia's gown, stained but radiant, clung to her like armor, her hair a cascade of defiance. She stood still, her eyes locked on Celeste, not with anger, but with a calm certainty that chilled the air. The investors' phones buzzed, alerts confirming the catastrophic withdrawal. The Moreau empire, built on arrogance, was teetering, and Nia's single sentence had pushed it to the edge. The room, once a stage for Celeste's cruelty, now belonged to Nia's silence. A silence that promised a reckoning no one could ignore. The grand ballroom of the Hotel de Luxe, once a glittering stage for the fashion elite, now pulsed with a different energy, a frenetic, almost primal panic that crackled like static in the air. The chandeliers still cast their golden glow, but their light seemed to falter, as if dimmed by the weight of an unfolding catastrophe. The clink of champagne flutes had been replaced by the urgent buzz of phones, their screens flashing with alerts that spread like wildfire. Nia Carter stood at the edge of the chaos, her emerald gown a beacon of defiance, the faint wine stain on its satin surface, a badge of her endurance. Her long, glossy black hair cascaded over her shoulders, each strand catching the light like a polished blade. And her face, serene and elegant, held a calm that seemed to anchor the room's spiraling dread. Her eyes, dark and unyielding, surveyed the scene with a quiet intensity, as if she had always known this moment would come. Minutes had passed since Naya's phone call. Those simple words, withdraw the full $5 billion from the Moreau Fund, still echoing like a thunderclap in the minds of those who'd heard them. The room, once a temple of Celeste Moreau's arrogance, was now a battlefield, its polished veneer cracking under the weight of truth. Celeste, the catwalk queen, stood frozen near the mahogany table, her silver gown no longer radiant but garish, a costume that failed to mask her unraveling composure. Her platinum blonde hair, once a crown of authority, now framed a face pale with disbelief, her lips trembling as she clutched an empty champagne glass. "She's lying," she shrieked, her voice shrill and desperate, cutting through the murmurs like a wounded animal's cry. "No one can do this to us. My father's empire is untouchable." But her words fell flat, swallowed by the rising tide of panic. The investors, once complicit in Celeste's cruelty, now scrambled like ants in a shattered nest. Phones lit up with notifications, stock alerts, bank confirmations, frantic emails from financial advisors. A hedge fund manager, his tailored suit creased with agitation, barked into his phone, "Confirm the transfer. How did this happen?" A fashion conglomerate executive, her diamond earrings glinting with every nervous turn of her head, whispered to her assistant, "The Moreau Fund is collapsing. It's real." The venture capitalist who'd recognized Nia's name from her charity work stared at her, his jaw tight with awe and fear. "$5 billion, he muttered to a colleague. "She's not just a designer, she's a titan." The fashion critic, her notebook abandoned, scribbled furiously on her phone, tweeting, "Nia Carter just rewrote the game. Moreau is done." Nia stood still, her presence a silent monolith amid the chaos. Her gown, though marred, glowed like a flame, its emerald hue a stark contrast to the room's fading opulence. Her hair, smoothed with care after Celeste's earlier assault, shimmered like a dark crown, a symbol of her unbroken spirit. She thought of the children at the Brooklyn orphanage, their laughter as they learned to sew, their trust in her a reminder of why she fought. She thought of her quiet nights in her modest apartment, sketching designs that spoke of resilience, building an empire not of arrogance but of purpose. This room, with its gilded cruelty, was just another hurdle, and Nia had leaped over higher ones before. Celeste spun toward Nia, her eyes wild with desperation. "You're bluffing!" she screamed, her voice cracking as she pointed a trembling finger. "You can't touch us. This is my father's world." But the room was no longer hers. The crowd's eyes, once fixed on her performance, now turned to Nia, their expressions a mix of shock and grudging respect. A stylist who'd attended Nia's charity workshops whispered to a model, "She's the one who funds those orphanages. She's no outsider." The philanthropist who'd seen Nia distribute clothes to foster kids nodded, his voice low but firm. "She's more powerful than all of them combined." The murmurs grew, a tide of realization washing over the room, drowning Celeste's fading authority. The ballroom's polished facade began to fracture. Waiters froze, their trays of champagne forgotten as they overheard frantic conversations. A pit boss from the hotel's casino, summoned to manage the escalating tension, spoke urgently into his headset. "We're seeing withdrawals across the board. The Moreau accounts are hemorrhaging." The news spread like a contagion, each whispered confirmation, a nail in the coffin of the Moreau empire. Investors clutched their phones, their faces ashen as they realized the scale of the collapse. The fashion conglomerate executive stood, her chair scraping the floor, and stormed toward the exit, muttering, "We're pulling out. This is a disaster." The hedge fund manager followed, his voice rising in panic. $5 billion, gone in minutes." Nia's silence was deafening, a force that reshaped the room's very atmosphere. She didn't need to speak. Her single action had spoken louder than any words could. Her eyes, steady and unblinking, met Celeste's, and for the first time, the catwalk queen flinched. The glass slipped from Celeste's hand, shattering on the marble floor, the sound a mirror to her crumbling empire. "No," she whispered, her voice barely audible, a plea to a reality that refused to bend. "This can't be happening." But it was. The Moreau dynasty, built on inherited arrogance and unchecked privilege, was unraveling, its foundations exposed as fragile by Nia's quiet power. The crowd parted instinctively as Nia took a single step forward, her heels clicking like a judge's gavel. Her gown, stained but radiant, seemed to glow brighter, a symbol of her resilience. Her hair, a cascade of black silk, framed her face like a halo, her calm a stark contrast to Celeste's panic. The philanthropist stepped forward, his voice cutting through the chaos. "You underestimated her," he said to no one in particular, but his words landed like a verdict. The stylist nodded, her eyes filled with guilt for her earlier silence. The critic's tweet went viral, the hashtag Monster Nia Carter trending, as the world began to see what the room now understood. Nia was no victim. She was a force, a woman whose quiet strength had just brought an empire to its knees. Celeste stumbled back, her silver gown catching the light like a fading star. Her hands shook, her once imperious smirk replaced by a mask of fear. The crowd, once her willing audience, now watched her with pity, their phones lowered, their laughter silenced. Nia stood tall, her silence a throne she didn't need to claim. The ballroom, once a stage for cruelty, was now a monument to her triumph. A triumph not of vengeance, but of dignity. The Moreau Empire was falling, and Nia Carter, with her serene elegance and unyielding resolve, had pushed it over the edge with a single, devastating blow. The Paris dawn broke over the city like a hesitant promise, its pale light filtering through the towering glass windows of the Moreau Corporation's headquarters. Once a bastion of untouchable wealth, the office now resembled a war room in collapse. Papers littered the marble floors, phones rang unanswered, and executives paced in frantic circles, their voices a cacophony of desperation. The air was thick with the acrid scent of spilled coffee and shattered ambition, a stark contrast to the opulence that had defined the Moreau Empire just a day ago. At the center of this chaos stood Nia Carter, her presence a quiet storm in a tailored black dress of her own design, its sleek lines accentuating her unyielding grace. Her long, glossy black hair flowed like a dark river, framing a face of serene elegance that seemed untouched by the turmoil. Her eyes, deep and resolute, held a calm that made the room's panic feel small. Celeste Moreau, the Catwalk queen, was a shadow of her former self. Her silver gown had been replaced by a disheveled silk blouse, its buttons misaligned as if fastened in haste. Her platinum blonde hair, once a crown of arrogance, hung in limp strands, framing a face ravaged by tears and smudged mascara. The news of the $5 billion withdrawal from the Moreau Fund had spread like wildfire, igniting a financial inferno that consumed contracts, froze credit lines, and drove investors to abandon ship. The empire her father had built was crumbling, and Celeste, who had wielded her privilege like a scepter, now stood trembling before Nia, her eyes wide with the raw terror of someone who had lost everything. The office, with its panoramic views of Paris, felt like a glass cage, trapping Celeste in the wreckage of her own making. "You can't do this to us," Celeste whispered, her voice a broken thread, barely audible over the hum of panicked voices in the background. She took a faltering step toward Nia, her hands wringing together, nails bitten to the quick. "Please, Nia, you don't understand what this means." The crowd of executives and assistants froze, their eyes darting between the two women, sensing the weight of the moment. A senior financial officer, his tie loosened and face pale, clutched a tablet showing plummeting stock charts. A secretary who'd once sneered at Nia's presence now averted her gaze, guilt etching her features. They all knew the truth. Nia's single phone call had brought the Moreau dynasty to its knees, and Celeste's cruelty had been the spark. Nia stood still, her black dress absorbing the light like a void, her hair shimmering as if woven from midnight itself. She thought of the children at the Brooklyn orphanage, their laughter as she taught them to sew, their trust a reminder of her purpose. She thought of the nights spent sketching in her modest apartment, building a legacy not of arrogance, but of resilience. Celeste's taunts, her violent tug on Nia's hair, her wine-stained assault. They were but fleeting wounds against the steel of Nia's spirit. "You treated me like a stain to be wiped away," Nia said, her voice low and steady, each word a polished stone that landed with devastating precision. "You wrote this ending when you pulled my hair in front of the world." Celeste's knees buckled, and she sank to the floor, a marionette with its strings cut. Tears streamed down her face, smearing mascara into dark rivers. "I'm sorry," she sobbed, her voice raw with desperation. "I didn't know who you were. I didn't mean it." She reached out, her trembling hands hovering near Nia's feet, as if grasping for salvation. "Please, Nia, I'll apologize publicly. I'll do anything. Don't let my family's empire die." The room held its breath, the executive's frantic whispers falling silent. A junior designer who'd seen Nia at a charity event for black orphans widened her eyes, whispering to a colleague, "She's the one who funds those kids' futures." Celeste had no idea. Nia's face remained serene, her eyes unwavering as they met Celeste's tear-streaked gaze. She remembered the runway, the sting of Celeste's hand in her hair, the crowd's cruel laughter. She remembered the countless rooms where her skin had been a barrier, her talent dismissed, her presence mocked. But she also remembered her own power, the empire she'd built in the shadows, the investments that gave her the leverage to topple giants. "You thought your words could erase me," Nia said, her voice calm but unyielding, cutting through the room like a blade. "But they only revealed who you are. You built your throne on cruelty, and now it's crumbling beneath you." Celeste's sobs grew louder, her body shaking as she clutched at the hem of Nia's dress. "I was wrong," she choked out, her voice a plea that echoed off the glass walls. "I'll make it right. I'll tell the world I was wrong. Please, just give us a chance." The executives exchanged uneasy glances, their faces a mix of shame and fear. The financial officer muttered, "She controls the Carter Trust. She could save us or finish us." The secretary, her earlier disdain replaced by awe, whispered, "She's more powerful than all of us." The room, once a fortress of Moreau's dominance, now belonged to Nia's quiet authority. Nia took a single step back, her heels clicking softly on the marble, a sound that carried the weight of finality. Her hair, a cascade of black silk, caught the dawn's light, a crown of resilience that needed no adornment. "You wrote this script," she said, her voice steady, each word a verdict. "You mocked me, humiliated me because of my skin. Now live with the consequences." She turned, her dress flowing like a dark tide, and walked toward the glass doors. The crowd parted instinctively, their eyes filled with a mix of reverence and regret. The junior designer whispered, "She's not just a designer. She's a force." Celeste remained on her knees, her sobs a hollow echo in the vast office. The empire she'd inherited, the power she'd wielded so carelessly, was slipping through her fingers like sand. The executives resumed their frantic calls, but their voices were muted, overshadowed by Nia's presence. She paused at the door, her silhouette framed against the Paris skyline, her hair and dress a testament to her unbroken spirit. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The Moreau Empire was falling, and Nia Carter, with her quiet strength and unyielding dignity, had rewritten its fate with a single, devastating act. The Grand Théâtre Lumière glowed under the Parisian twilight, its marble facade a beacon for the world's fashion elite. Inside, the auditorium thrummed with anticipation, a sea of velvet seats filled with critics, designers, and luminaries, their eyes fixed on the runway that stretched like a ribbon of possibility. The air shimmered with the scent of jasmine and the soft hum of violins, a prelude to Nia Carter's latest collection, a masterpiece whispered to redefine the industry. Nia stood backstage, her figure draped in a self-designed gown of midnight blue, its fabric flowing like liquid starlight, accentuating her unyielding grace. Her long, glossy black hair cascaded over her shoulders, each strand catching the light like a polished obsidian thread, and her face, serene and elegant, radiated a calm that seemed to hush the chaos of the world beyond. Her eyes, deep and resolute, held a quiet fire, a testament to the journey that had brought her here. The fall of the Moreau Empire had sent shockwaves through the fashion world, its collapse a headline that dominated every newsstand and screen. Celeste Moreau's public humiliation, her tearful pleas for mercy, had faded into a footnote, her name now a whisper of caution among those who once cheered her cruelty. Nia, however, had not lingered on the wreckage. She had returned to her work, her vision, her purpose, pouring her soul into a collection that spoke of resilience and beauty born from struggle. The crowd tonight was different. No longer a coliseum of malice, but a congregation eager to witness a new era. Among them sat the fashion critic who'd once faltered under Celeste's sway, her pen poised with newfound respect. The philanthropist who'd seen Nia's charity work at Brooklyn orphanages leaned forward, his face alight with anticipation. They knew Nia's story, and they were here to see its next chapter. As the lights dimmed, the runway ignited, models gliding forth in Nia's creations, garments that wove bold patterns with delicate threads, each piece a story of survival and strength. The audience gasped, their applause swelling like a tide, not out of obligation but awe. Nia watched from the wings, her heart steady, her mind drifting to the children she taught to sew, their small hands stitching dreams under her guidance. She thought of her modest apartment, where sketches came to life by lamplight, and the quiet nights she spent funding scholarships for Black orphans, her name rarely attached to the gifts. This moment, this stage, was not just for her. It was for them, for every soul who'd been told they didn't belong. The final model stepped off the runway, and the crowd rose, their ovation a roar that shook the chandeliers. Nia stepped forward, her gown shimmering like a midnight sky, her hair a cascade of black silk that caught the spotlight like a crown. The applause intensified, a wave of reverence that drowned out the memory of Celeste's taunts. Nia raised a hand, her gesture simple but commanding, and the room fell silent, every eye on her. "Tonight," she began, her voice low but resonant, each word a polished gem, "we celebrate not just fashion, but the power of dreams that refuse to be broken." The crowd hung on her words, their phones lowered, their attention absolute. She paused, her eyes sweeping the room, and then announced, "I'm launching the Carter Foundation, a fund to empower young Black designers and orphans, to give them the tools to stitch their own futures." The auditorium erupted, a standing ovation that vibrated through the marble walls. The fashion critic scribbled furiously, her earlier complicity replaced by admiration. The philanthropist stood, clapping with a fervor that spoke of redemption. A young designer in the back row, who'd once attended Nia's sewing workshops, wiped away tears, whispering to her companion, "She's changing everything." The crowd's applause was not just for Nia's designs, but for her spirit, her dignity, her refusal to be diminished. They saw her now, not as the target of Celeste's cruelty, but as a titan who had toppled an empire with a single phone call, a woman whose quiet strength had rewritten the rules of power. Nia stood at the runway's edge, her gown a testament to her artistry, her hair a symbol of her resilience. She thought of the runway where Celeste had yanked her hair, the ballroom where wine had stained her dress, the meeting where her $5 billion withdrawal had shattered an empire. Those moments had tested her, but they had also forged her. She had walked through fire, not to burn, but to shine. The crowd's faces, once complicit in laughter, now glowed with respect. Some bowed in shame for their silence. A fashion editor who'd mocked Nia's presence now clapped with fervor, her eyes averted. A socialite who'd recorded the humiliation lowered her head, her earlier glee replaced by regret. Nia's lips curved into a faint smile, not of triumph over Celeste, but of peace with herself. She had not sought revenge. She had sought justice, the kind that needed no fanfare, only truth. Her foundation, announced tonight, would build futures for those who, like her, had been told they were less. She stepped back, her heels clicking softly on the runway, a sound that carried the weight of finality. The crowd surged to their feet again, their applause a thunderous acknowledgement of her victory, not over one woman, but over a world that had tried to make her small. As she turned to leave the stage, the spotlight followed her hair and gown glowing like a beacon in the darkness. The Grand Théâtre Lumière, once a stage for cruelty, was now a monument to her legacy. Nia Carter had not just survived, she had prevailed, her dignity a force that no empire could crush. The crowd watched her go, their cheers echoing long after she disappeared into the wings, a woman who had proven that true power lies not in noise, but in the quiet, unshakable strength of one's worth. Nia Carter's journey is a testament to the power of dignity, A reminder that true strength doesn't shout. It stands resolute, unyielding in the face of cruelty. Her story shows us that resilience and grace can topple even the mightiest empires, proving that worth is not defined by the world's noise, but by the quiet fire within. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Share in the comments what this tale means to you, and let us know where you're watching from. Thank you for joining us on this unforgettable journey, for standing with Nia's triumph. Your presence fuels these stories, and we can't wait to meet you again for the next tale of justice and inspiration. Until then, keep believing in the power of your own voice.